Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 28th, 2023. Really getting close to the end of the year now. Time for another show, though. Almost time for another year. We get to that joke, I guess, at the end of the week. And, hey, let's pick up where we left off, shall we? Oh, wait a minute. There's 10,000 other stories that are interrupting our discussion of the Colorado Supreme Court, the 14th Amendment, SCOTUS and their current unwillingness to hear the emergency appeal from Jack Smith, or 10 other of these various cases swirling around. Okay, well, that doesn't mean we have to drop Colorado from the news. Colorado is in the news, as a matter of fact, and that's on Justice's mind as well. So things overlap here. Not the top news of the day, but interesting news. Lauren Boebert getting set to, I don't know, I guess rent a house in the 4th District or something. That's usually what they do when they need to carpetbag over one district. But Lauren Boebert dropping out of the race to retain her 3rd District seat in Colorado. I think it's become pretty plain that she cannot win. She won by about, some ridiculous handful of votes last time as it was. And, well, you know, since she's been sticking her hands down her date's pants at Beetlejuice musicals or what have you, and vaping and loudly getting ejected from theaters, I guess some margin of voters have decided that maybe she's not the most responsible. And so what she's decided to do is move over into the 4th District, where Ken Buck is the incumbent there. And of course, Ken Buck recently said things other than that Donald Trump is awesome and that Republicans can do no wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess now he's in trouble. So Lauren Boebert going to move over to the more conservative 4th District and try and displace Ken Buck. I don't know whether she really cares whether or not Ken Buck remains in Congress or not, but there you have it. All right. Well, anyway, I have to remember exactly why Ken Buck was on our radar recently. Greg Dworkin probably remembers. We talked about him extensively. It's hard to keep track of all these idiots. Oh, Buck retired? Okay, is that what it is? All right, well, Dworkin tells me that Buck has retired. I'm only using last names from here on in. All right. All right. Well, we don't want to refer to him as Ken. That's disrespectful, but I can call Greg Greg. He's a friend. All right. Well, at any rate, so very interesting. I don't know whether that really changes much or not, but it might mean that Lauren Boebert sticks around. Might have been nice to be rid of both Ken Buck and Lauren Boebert at the same time, and we may yet get that. The focus of attention this morning, though, I think mostly seems to be on Nikki Haley, the super smart, kind of moderate one, apparently, that was running and losing very badly in the Republican primary for president. She has gone to New Hampshire, and you know how things are in New Hampshire and in Iowa, these early states in particular. And she comes from an early state, South Carolina, and was the governor there and has a record there and everything. But New Hampshire and Iowa, you famously have to go and do the retail politics thing, and there's a town hall every other day. And and of course in New Hampshire, everybody's in the state legislature. So, you know, it's a politically involved, aware, awake kind of crowd. Not woke. Not that. Awake. You see, totally different. That's what white people can do. It's all right for them to be awake, just not woke. So at any rate, she was asked what I guess Republican presidential candidates now consider to be a trick question. What was the cause of the Civil War? Which, you know, in New Hampshire, you are likely to get or be expected to give, perhaps, maybe, I guess if you're really doing the retail politics thing, a slightly different answer than you might give, let's say, in South Carolina or, you know, various other states. But it was a very interesting illustration of how captive Republican presidential candidates are to the white supremacist wing of Republicans all over the country. She's in New Hampshire, being asked by the presumably the descendants, if not the neighbors of the descendants of the states that won the Civil War, being asked directly, so what was the whole cause of this thing, you South Carolinian person? I have a feeling you're not going to answer this question correctly. And in fact, she didn't. And she gave the cringiest dodges possible, including initially attempting to reverse it and say, oh yeah, well, what do you think was the cause of the Civil War? And the guy handles it deftly. I'm not the candidate. This is your town hall. People are asking you questions. You answer. And then she gave this horrific dodge of a question. Well, it was about, she didn't even go to the standbys of, economic system, she gave this real awful pablum about, freedoms and liberties and such. And really, honestly, if you look at it in writing, it sounds very much like Donald Trump, in that there was this one point at which she says, well, we have to do all the things to make sure people have the liberties, which taken by itself, in spoken form, it wasn't quite as horrific. That's a snippet, but that's a very Donald Trump kind of an answer. And then, basically, so the questioner takes her to task on it and says, I can't believe that in 2023, or for that matter, in 1923, any time that you didn't even mention the word slavery. And then she doubles down on this thing and says, well, what do you want me to say about slavery? Like patronizing to the guy, like, oh, one of these people who's focusing on slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Really just unbelievable. But, will it damage her in any way? I'm not sure. I mean, I guess because she's disposable as a Republican candidate because she's bound to lose, you could see this being the end for her. But at the same time, the guy who's going to win was somebody that we've seen 18 things. This is it. He insulted John McCain. There's no coming back from this one. Oh, there is? Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Just a very interesting topic of discussion. And of course, next week she'll go to Iowa and say that the cause of the Civil War was butter cows. And, I just give the localized answer, I guess. But you can't go to New Hampshire and tell them that the cause of the Civil War was something else. You can't give them the Southern answer in the North. That's just a huge, huge mistake. But it illustrates how captured Republicans are, how cowed they are, how butter cowed they are by worrying about what will people who are white supremacists think of my giving a truthful answer about the Civil War. And it's just odd that the Republicans aren't proud of winning the Civil War anymore. I guess I just don't know why. It's probably because they're racists. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, and he'll probably want to talk about this too. And let's find out what he's got to say. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
Hey.
So,
who cares, right?
I was reading this piece here.
Yes.
It happened to be about something else. The Michigan Supreme Court, not the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the Colorado Supreme Court or the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yes.
It was SCOME. Not SCOTUS.
I like
SCOE.
these
we'll get to that. There's a story about that, or SCOCO in this particular case. So, there was this paragraph that jumped out at me, and we'll get a little bit more into the Michigan case. But this was a very important paragraph because it's important to define your point of view.
All right.
Right.
I don't know why Civil
War happened. I believe it's from the New York Times.
Okay.
And it says, the cases nationwide are being litigated with enormous urgency because primary voters will start casting ballots in Iowa in mid-January.
Right. That's like
now,
next week.
Let me ask you a question.
All right.
You, David Waldman,
yes.
Not the other Waldman. You.
Slavery.
Who do you think is
yes.
going to be the Republican nominee?
Ronald Trump. Yes. His double, his evil twin. He's got one.
So you think Trump will be the nominee?
I mean, yeah.
And do you think Nikki Haley is going to be his vice president? She's obviously running for it. But
yeah, I was going to say no. And then I thought, wow, she's a terrible choice. Maybe. No, I don't think so.
Against him and is challenging him. You think he's going to pick her?
No, I don't think he'll.
Okay,
yeah,
so you don't
that's
think
the traditional thing to do, but him.
to pin you down, like if you were in a New Hampshire town hall.
I don't know. What do you think?
Exactly. Yes. I don't think he's going to be the nominee, and I don't think Haley's going to be his vice president, although I think she's running for it really hard.
Okay, I mean...
If you take that point of view, it helps explain a lot of stuff. For example...
All right. How does he not end up there? I guess gets convicted. Okay.
The cases nationwide are being litigated with enormous urgency because primary voters will start casting ballots in Iowa mid-January. Right. Who cares? Trump's the nominee. I don't feel urgency.
Okay, yes.
And I'm not a Republican.
Yeah.
Okay. So
you were just screwing around.
If you take the point of view that this isn't decided yet, you're going to look at Haley in a completely different light than if you think that it is.
Okay. Like, right? I guess,
and I think it's already decided. So I'm watching her and saying, I don't know what she's doing. How is she supposed to beat Trump if she refuses to attack Trump? And the answer is she's not trying to beat him. She's trying to be his vice president.
Yeah.
In fact, there was an article in the New York Times, and I saw the headline, and I couldn't force myself to read it. The bold strategy of playing it safe by Nikki Haley.
Oh. You mean...
And I thought to myself, that's stupid. It's not bold if you're playing it safe.
No, that's true.
Well, it is if you're running for vice president. Well, yeah, okay, so that's what she's doing. So we all understand this. So now you step back.
It's bold to run for his vice president.
Look at Haley and say, okay, this is a woman who's a skilled politician. Nobody denies that. Probably the most skilled of the ones left. And she, I don't know, a decade ago, got rid of the Confederate flag as being part of the South Carolina flag.
Right. That was a thing. It was people thought that she would stick with that.
Can't mention the word slavery without trying to embarrass the person who asked the question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's odd, and you look at her and say, okay, what's
wrong with you?
A bad person. She's a good politician and a really bad person.
Yeah, that's sometimes the same thing.
So David Frum introduced a concept. Remember, he's a Republican. He's a conservative. He's an anti-Trumper.
Knows about slavery.
Like Bill Kristol, feels that the best path for the Republican Party now would be to reject Trump and pick Nikki Haley. That's his position.
I know. Isn't that odd?
Because he says Trump is uniquely bad. Haley's bad, but Trump is uniquely bad because Trump tried to take over the United States government with an insurrection, and Haley didn't.
But she wasn't very mad about someone else who did. That's such a big
difference that you have to put Haley in a different category. And Matthew Dowd, here's how Frum phrased it. You dunk. Well, of course we do.
Yeah.
But Nikki Haley winning the GOP nomination in 2024 to present voters with a Biden-Haley choice is the pivot that pulls America off the dark timeline and onto the light one. Meaning no code, no insurrection. That's what he's talking about.
All right. Is this written prior to this news?
This is December 28th, 2023, 7 a.m.
Oh, no. So this is with this news.
They're
signing up for the Haley campaign, essentially.
And Matthew Dowd says, look, first, the chance of her winning the GOP nomination is roughly the same as me playing on the PGA Tour next year. Second, in many ways, Haley's as bad as Trump. She's enabled him at every step. She says she'll support him, and she refuses to speak truth to GOP voters. And Frum says, I take exception to that. The formula, candidate X is as bad as Trump, denies the unique danger posed by Trump. Nobody else would do anything remotely like a coup. If the GOP replaced him with anybody, the country would be safer.
That might be true.
X is as bad as Trump implies GOP is no worse than X, or Trump is no worse than X, and that's the kind of normalization you hear from GOP mainstreamers offering excuses to make cowardly peace with Trump. It's false. X is always better than Trump. And Dowd says, well, that's like saying the underboss of the mafia is better than the boss. The problem isn't the boss. The problem is the organization.
Okay, yeah.
So the problem is the party. Lose the party. The party sucks. You can't save the party. Nikki Haley being the nominee isn't saving the party because the party is doomed. The party wants Trump. And if the party doesn't get Trump, the party will force Haley to be Trump. And that's what she's doing as she's running for vice president. And I think that's the context by which you have to look at this, because she's not winning the nomination. She's not saving the GOP. She's not a sane alternative. She's a terrible person who can't acknowledge that slavery is bad. And the only reason she's better than Trump is just horrible. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make her good in any way, shape, or form. And talk about picking the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, really.
I suppose you would. I mean, if you were forced to vote, you'd take Haley, but she's terrible.
Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's no way out, and you have to select between Trump and Haley. Okay, all right, I see what you're getting at here, but I don't know what happens. I mean, as long as Trump is alive, whoever gets nominated basically has to chase Trump and Trump voters the whole time. So
well, Trump voters. I mean, Trump is just a symptom. He's terrible. He has no self-control, bodily functions or otherwise.
Yes,
and he's representative of what his party wants. He went this way because as a con man, he saw that's where the crowd wanted to go.
Yeah.
So he's the classic run out in front of the parade.
Yes.
How do we know this? Well, he talks about poisoning the blood of our people, and polls say Iowa Republicans like it. The problem is the Republican Party, not so much Haley.
Yes.
And Haley, as a good politician, understands this, and she's trying to run out in front of the parade, or at least not get in the way of the parade. And that's her playing it safe thing. So that's the context where you have to look at this. And, God bless New Hampshire voters. That's one of the reasons why, yes, it's too white. Yes, it's not representative of the country, but it's small. Mm-hmm. And being small means that, just like in Iowa, remember the old Saturday Night Live jokes, the nominee has to go to your house and do your laundry. I mean, otherwise you won't vote for him.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know. I never got to know him. He had to come and do dishes with me. It's the only way you can really find out who he's really like. You got to watch him put the silverware away. How he does it tells you everything about how he'll govern the country. I mean, little states get a chance to meet and greet people. And God bless this voter who got into a Nikki Haley town hall and had the opportunity to ask her that. And we all saw her answer. And that's what people are talking about this morning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, well done there.
So I understand the argument that, New Hampshire should go first. Well, no, it doesn't need to go first. It just needs to go at some point.
Yes, and be recorded when they do.
Yeah, it doesn't matter when in the chain they go, so long as they do this function. I don't want New Hampshire to stop doing this. I just don't think they should go first.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with that. But they do make a good case for themselves when they handle their candidates.
When they do stuff like this.
Yeah.
Right? So there you have it. So, what's the deal with Nikki Haley? She is who you think she is. And in a normal world, you would think that people would, take umbrage at, for example, refusing to talk about slavery and think, well, this is the woman who banned abortion in South Carolina. As governor, supported it and worked to have that happen. And how in the world is she going to be competitive in a national election? And the answer is, well, people aren't thrilled with Biden. But then again, if she's the nominee, Trump takes his third of the party who will vote for no one else, and he walks. And he spends his time attempting to destroy her, which he might well succeed at.
Yeah,
not so much because personally she takes umbrage and he gets under her skin, but rather because he takes his voters. So politically she gets destroyed.
Okay.
So she's not going to be the nominee.
Well, I didn't really think that she was, but it was. I don't know. It was just a terrible thing to watch. It was uncomfortable. I just keep thinking about all of these Republican candidates who are insisting, well, not only are they going to be the anti-Trump, but the handful that say, well, I'm going to put us back on the path. What was it? The way Jindal said it was, we got to be the non-stupid party, and then immediately realizing, wait a minute.
Yeah, and we got to build berms out in the middle of the ocean to stop hurricanes from coming.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe we should just nuke them. I mean, he didn't say that. Trump said that. But stupid party? No, they're the stupid party.
Yeah, and she knows it. She's got it. That was really something. That's all I can tell you. And it just, I could.
But as Adlai Stevenson was famously quoted, I don't need smart people to vote for me. I need a majority.
Yes, that's true. I just also thought it was odd. I mean, she knew she was in New Hampshire, right? I mean, sometimes you lose track. You're doing a lot of a lot of traveling. But they're kind of northern and pretty Yankee. I just thought that was odd that you would be like sort of a Confederate sympathizer answer. Well, come on. Slavery, you really going to make me talk about that? And
well,
also,
there's no good answer she could give that would help her get votes, so she will refuse to talk about it. It's just a question of how.
I guess. But I mean, I don't know. What's wrong with I don't think it loses you any votes anywhere to say, what's the cause of the Civil War? Slavery.
Right.
Well, what else?
Since we're talking about Nikki Haley in New Hampshire, let's talk a little bit about Wisconsin.
All right.
Between now and when the break is. And then after that, maybe we'll talk about Michigan and a little bit about what Jack Smith is doing and our legal lesson for the day, that is to say for me.
Why not? But first,
a motion in limine.
Oh, all right.
So I get to learn stuff.
Yeah.
But for right now, this is an interesting piece in The Guardian. For whatever reason,
we're guarding something.
Robin Vos, the state assembly speaker, very powerful conservative in Wisconsin, who worked for a decade to give GOP absolute power with Scott Walker and gerrymandering and all that sort of stuff. For whatever reason, he decided to give a interview to the Liberal Guardian as they were writing about him. And the title of the piece is Wisconsin Right-Wingers Fall from Conservative Grace. The MAGA Crowd Despises Him.
Oh, all right.
In early December, a right-wing Wisconsin organization called Hot Government sent out a breathless email. Mike Lindell, the pillow salesman turned election conspiracy theorist and staunch Donald Trump ally, had nominated an important Wisconsin politician for an award. Leadership in being obstacle to stopping election crime, the email declared.
Oh, okay.
His target wasn't a Democrat. It was Robin Vos.
Boo, maybe.
He was, in all respects, a loyal right-winger, but Vos has drawn a line in embracing Trump's false claim that he actually won Wisconsin and refused to join colleagues who suggested overturning the election. His unwillingness to cross that line has turned him into a pariah on the far right, a target of Lindell, an enemy of Trump, and a symbol of the current state of the Republican Party, where loyalty to Trump is the key litmus test. That's why I don't think Nikki Haley will be the VP. She dared to run against him. And she appears to be popular and has skills he doesn't have, and so he won't want her.
Oh, okay.
Now, Vos is fighting elements of his party that rejected the results of the 2020 election and have come to view him not as a hardline conservative, but as a corrupt establishment hack complicit in Trump's undoing. With the Trump flank of the grassroots Wisconsin Republican Party as strong as ever, Vos is scrambling to appease his hardline party detractors so he doesn't become a casualty of the movement he helped create. Again, talks a little bit about why Nikki Haley acts the way she does. But, the main point there, and you started laughing because you got it, Adrian Bott back in 2015 wrote this tweet, which is famous now. I never thought leopards would eat my face, sobs woman who voted for the leopard-eating people's faces party.
Right.
And that's exactly what this is. Vos never thought that the leopards would eat his face, but guess what? The leopards are coming for your face.
Yes. And it really doesn't, ordinarily I wouldn't look at it and say, delicious, but, if it's what you eat, it's what you eat.
If you were French, you'd ask what kind of sauce. So there's a segment of the MAGA crowd who despises him because they adamantly believe President Trump was cheated, said a veteran Wisconsin GOP operative who spoke anonymously, given his role within pro-Trump circles. Where he is right now is kind of emblematic of the fight going on within the Republican Party here in Wisconsin and across the nation. So it's a local.
Yes, well, politics is.
Right.
You know that.
And it's just emblematic of what's going on here. Everybody seems to think Robin tells everybody in the caucus, you vote this way, but that's not how it works. Right? So he's another one who's really doing his best to run in front of the parade. But like Raffensperger or even the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, while staunch conservatives do not accept the 2020 election as being stolen, Vos is in that camp, and he can't run away from that, and they're coming for him.
Oh, well.
Now, whether they'll get him or not, I don't know. But we've seen what happened in Michigan with the Republican Party there. They're broke.
Oh, yeah.
They're broke in. because the Trumpers took over. And we'll see what happens in Wisconsin. Now, interestingly, here's the quote that I couldn't believe that Voss actually gave to The Guardian. Under pressure from Trump, Voss in 2021 announced an investigation into the election appointing Michael Gableman, a former Wisconsin Supreme Court justice who had bolstered Trump's disproven claims of election fraud and spoke at a Wisconsin Stop the Steal rally. Gableman was terrible. They voted him out. During his investigation, Gableman traveled across the U.S. speaking at elections conference hosted by Lindell and viewing the discredited Cyber Ninjas election audit in Maricopa County. And a year later, when the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled the use of ballot drop boxes was unlawful, the former president approached Voss with another call to decertify the election. And I explained, said Voss, that it's not allowed under the Constitution, he told WISN-TV in Milwaukee. And Trump was furious, says The Guardian. Days later, the former president endorsed Adam Steen, Voss's election-denying primary opponent, calling Steen a rising patriotic candidate. And Voss barely survived the primary, winning by less than 300 votes. That's less than Lauren Boebert won by. She won by
500 something, right?
Yeah, 546.
Yes.
He won by
and
300.
A vape pen.
And then he said,
close.
And this is the quote.
You should move.
One of my biggest regrets was hiring Gableman. He was way wackier than I thought. He was disappointing. He was inept. He was way worse for the system. I can't believe he actually said that.
Wow. I mean, okay.
He's in trouble.
Yeah.
With Republicans.
Telling the truth. Can't do that.
Oh he's God. Us. How dare you?
Well, he was right. That's something, but I'm not going to help you. I mean, congratulations. Enjoy it. That's all I have to say to you. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm running for vice president on the Republican ticket, and it doesn't matter what I say for the next hour or so.
Boldly playing it safe.
Boldly going where you have to go, or else you'll get in trouble.
So there's this article in The Hill which reinforces something I said yesterday, and I read it only after being on the show with you.
Okay, reinforcing priors. That's good, right?
Reinforcing priors is like always nice. And the title of the article is The Thomas-Trump Conflict Hiding in Plain Sight. That is to say, Jenny Thomas is an insurrectionist. And, everybody knows it.
The Thomas-Trump Conflict Hiding in Plain Sight. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, basically, it's arguing that Clarence Thomas really needs to recuse himself because his wife's an insurrectionist. So how can he do any of this fairly? And the answer is, well, they decide for themselves. That's the rules.
Yeah. There you go. Now, that's fairly right there.
Trump initially presented his immunity claim to District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's presiding over the case in Washington, D.C. She ruled against Trump. Trump immediately appealed to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals.
Though he didn't appeal to the District of Columbia in any way.
Right. You call it the District Court. I call it the Appellate
yes.
Court. Same thing, right?
Yes, it is.
Figuring that the case was inevitably headed to the Supreme Court, Smith filed an unusual, though not unprecedented, petition for a writ of certiorari.
Yeah. That's just,
He applied for cert, as we say in the non-lawyer world.
Like the old
before judgment, seeking to bypass the appellate court to get the issue resolved as quickly as possible. Trump objected.
Hey.
Okay. And then this is the line that caught my eye. Although Jack Smith's maneuver failed, meaning the appellate court gets to rule first, and they are having their hearing January 7th, so it's like in a week and a few days. Although Smith's maneuver failed and the immunity issue will now be addressed by the Intermediate Appellate Court, he still put Thomas on the spot just by raising the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Yeah.
That's what I said yesterday.
That is. They heard you.
They heard me.
Maybe.
They wrote the article just because I said that on your show.
That's right. Very powerful.
Now, what
That
happens
seems
after
correct.
that, there's a whole bunch of letters sent to Roberts about about Thomas and how he should recuse himself, Dick Blumenthal, a couple of congressmen. It'll have no effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
Thomas ignored the letters, but, you know, it's out there. So you have that going on, and we're going to talk about Jack Smith's maneuvering a little bit. But meanwhile, the SCOME, the Michigan Supreme Court, gave Donald Trump an important victory in the legal battle. Why is it an important victory? It's important if you think the Republican primaries are important and are still going on.
Oh.
Otherwise,
Well,
it's, you know, it's a minor setback on the way to the real decision.
Okay. I can see that.
And I take objection to most of the news coverage, media, particularly broadcast media, who basically say, Trump won, this is key, because they make it sound like the objections are frivolous and unimportant and doomed to lose. And none of that's true.
Oh.
Okay?
Yeah.
And as the New York Times notes, the Michigan Supreme Court gave Trump an important victory in the legal battle over his eligibility to return to the White House by allowing the former president to appear on the state's primary ballot. It's important if you think the primaries are important. I don't, because I think they're over already. And then the next paragraph is the important one. But in a narrow ruling, the court left the door open for a new challenge to bar Trump from the general election ballot in the key battleground state over his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Now, let me make an important point the Republicans make all the time when they talk about states' rights. Different states have different laws.
Yes.
Okay? In Michigan, the law edges toward, as Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, noted, the law basically says the state's top court had rightly concluded, she said, that she lacked the authority to prevent Trump from appearing on the primary ballot. In Michigan, the law says, whether you're eligible or not has nothing to do with it. You want to be on the primary? Everybody gets to be on the primary. We'll sort it out later.
Okay.
So the sorting out later is the important point.
Yes.
And that, wait for it, comes later.
Well, that's what later points do.
So Supreme Court has to go first. And then she says, once the Supreme Court decides this, then I'll know what to do with this. What does that mean? It means that if the Supreme Court agrees with Colorado, Michigan's going to sue Trump to get him off the general election ballot, which has different rules than the primary ballots.
Yeah.
Which has different rules in different states. But that's how Michigan works.
And arguably, Michigan could sue to throw him off of the general election ballot, no matter what happens with Colorado. But yeah, they'll want to see what the Supreme Court has to say, whether they decide to waste their time or not.
Right. So meanwhile, Jack Smith is going to try to work out this deal somehow with some of the courts, eventually the Supreme Court, about whether Trump really has absolute immunity. He doesn't. Norm Eisen says, we did Norm Eisen articles all day yesterday. Jack Smith knows Trump's absolute immunity appeal is likely to fail, he said on Twitter, even though he doesn't have to. He's continuing to file pretrial motions at a fast pace to move quickly when proceedings resume. And the latest that he did, and Joyce Vance has a long treatise on this, which I want to mention. But the first thing we have to do is define what it means to file a motion in limine, which is a really fancy legal term for my side is saying to the judge, the other side can't introduce this stuff because it would prejudice the jury. And let me give you an example of how that works. Let's say you're Willie Sutton, the bank robber. And Willie Sutton, the bank robber, is famous for this phrase. Somebody asked him, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is.
Keen insight.
Very smart guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he's robbed a few banks. And you, Willie Sutton, are on trial for robbing a bank. Your lawyer is going to say to the judge, I don't want the other 19 times he robbed a bank to be introduced at this trial. It would be prejudicial. It would make it sound like he's a serial bank robber when the issue before this court is this particular situation where Willie walks in a bank. He's so well known, the teller sees him and hands him money. He didn't ask for it. We're just going to try this one. The other convictions has nothing to do with it. You cannot introduce this stuff at trial. It's prejudicial. And the judge said, yeah, you're right. I can see where you're going here. Now, you're going to have to prove to the jury that that's exactly what happened, and the prosecution may have something else to say about it. But no, the prosecution is not allowed to introduce all of those other convictions on bank robbery for this particular trial. And that's what this motion's about. So Jack Smith goes to the courts and says, look, I want to not have prejudicial information in the district court for Donald Trump. I don't want to allow him to talk about politics. I don't want to allow him to talk about stuff that might play in the jury's sympathies in terms of their political leanings. That would prejudice the jury. It would be jury nullification. It would be jury tampering. I don't want you to allow it, and I want a pretrial ruling about this. And the assumption is that Trump is going to say, hey, what are you doing? You are trying to hold a trial as if the date really is March 4th. I'm trying to delay it. What are you doing offering these motions when everybody knows the whole thing is suspended until the Supreme Court decides what's going on here, which means that the appellate court has to decide that first. And what are you doing filing motions? And Smith is saying, well, I'm assuming that we win and, it's going to be on time, and I'm not going to let you slow me down. So I'm just acting as if the trial's on. And Trump's saying, well, I'm acting as if the trial's off. And so that's what's going on right here.
Yeah, well, they are both acting. That's true. Smith also can, he's making things happen, making headlines, getting rulings in court, no matter the fact that the trial wouldn't start until March anyway, even if it's on time. And it's just a good strategy for working against a party in Trump who's doing everything to delay it and hoping that everyone will forget that he's on trial with each delay. And Smith is making that impossible, but with good basis. It's not just about staying in the headlines. These things would probably have to be litigated prior to trial, regardless whether it was scheduled to start in March or scheduled to start in June. So, the motion in limine is just, I guess that's the fancy terminology for getting this issue settled before we even start trial. I want this decided before we go.
Things to be settled before we start trial. The immunity one is the famous one, but this is an issue too.
Right. I know. So they have all sorts of different, I know it gets confusing, the different Latin terminologies for stuff we do ahead of time. It's not some of them are motions in limine and some of them are, what did we say? Not interstitial, but I'm blanking now on our Latin terminology, but different kinds of motion. But this one, as I understand it too, what he's looking for was, I want to prevent Trump from making the argument at trial in front of the jury that this whole thing is just politically motivated, that there's a partisan bent to this, and this is really not about what Trump did, but about Biden and the Justice Department wanting to get rid of Biden's chief political rival. And that's not what's at the heart of this prosecution. It's a prosecution about the things he did.
Right. Now, just as an aside, KPRC in Houston has a video series on YouTube called Anatomy of a Trial. And what they do is they have a lawyer there with one of the reporters from KPRC. Mm-hmm. And in each different video, they explain a Latin term that often comes up in trials so that we, the lay public, will understand what the heck everybody's talking about.
Yes.
So it's really quite useful if you're ever interested in this. What Joyce Vance writes is prosecutors and courts, too, are usually fairly permissive when it comes to evidence a defendant wants to offer, but there's a clear line. Defendants can't offer evidence that's designed to suggest to the jury, even if you think I'm guilty, you should vote to acquit me anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm going to, for example, she didn't write this, I'm saying this, I'm going to, for example, offer evidence to show that I'm a victim, and you should feel sorry for me. And because that's the case, and because you agree with my political leanings, and you think that immigrants are trying to poison the blood of America, you should vote to acquit me because I'm one of you. You're not allowed to do that at a trial.
No.
At least if the judge says you're not. The prosecution is allowed to say this should be banned. And
okay.
It's an effort by a defendant to convince jurors to ignore the law and refuse to convict. And that seems to be a key part of Donald Trump's strategy, and Jack Smith calls it out in his motion, asking the court to prevent Trump, that's Joyce Man's writing, from offering evidence that isn't relevant to the charges, but's designed to sway the jury to acquit for impermissible reasons. Mm-hmm. Now, the D.C. prosecution is currently stayed by order of the court. Smith takes the position, which he did in an earlier filing, that it's permissible for him to file additional material consistent with previously set court deadlines. Trump's lawyers are certain to call that out. Smith's position is that he can still file, and that'll be up to the judge to decide.
Okay.
Now, Smith has 3 buckets of evidence he wants to prevent Trump from offering. 1, evidence and arguments that don't bear on guilt or innocence. 2, irrelevant and prejudicial evidence, an argument about January 6th. And 3, other improper evidence. And each bucket is full of specific examples. His arguments are well-grounded in law, and when Judge Chutkan rules on the motions, likely she'll sign off on substantially all of them. One additional option, judges will sometimes admonish the parties to approach the bench before they raise an issue that's been the subject of a motion in limine out of the hearing of the jury, so the judge can assess the evidence relevance and context at the time before making a final ruling.
Okay.
Now, in some cases, she can conditionally rule the evidence is inadmissible, but give Trump's lawyers the opportunity to ask her to reconsider. Mm-hmm. And it's a 20-page motion, so we don't know what she's going to do.
Read it.
But that's what happened when you read that Jack Smith asked the Chutkan to rule that the jury can't hear certain stuff. That's what all of this is.
Yes, that's the substance of it. And the terminology, again, right. So this is a motion in limine, something that happens before the trial begins. And all of this has been before the trial begins. But in case you're confused, I guess an easy way to separate the two. The motion in limine is the one you make to the trial judge. I need you to decide this before we begin our trial. And if you are Donald Trump and you're appealing everything, including the decisions on motions in limine, you make an interlocutory appeal of the ruling on the motion in limine to the next court up.
So we've done in limine, a motion in limine, and we've done interlocutory appeal.
Yes.
And this whole Trump insurrection has been an education. You know, you learn a whole lot about what happened in the 1860s, and you learn a whole lot about how the legal system works, and you learn a whole lot of Latin.
For the dumbest president in history, that's actually saying something.
Yeah, Trump is quite a teacher. You know, he never gets credit for like how well he teaches people stuff.
He should start claiming it. You know what? I never get credit for these things, but I'm giving a college level course on criminal procedure
and insurrection.
Yeah, right.
It's true.
It's working.
He is.
We're all learning. It's like as if the devil incarnate had written Schoolhouse Rock.
Right. So back to substance here. Larry Levitt points out the fact that the Biden administration has achieved record enrollment in the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, with improved affordability becomes more and more politically salient every time Trump opens his mouth. Every time Trump vows once again to try and repeal and replace Obamacare. I'm the one that opens his mouth. Larry Levitt didn't say that. I did. Yeah, he's nicer than I am.
He doesn't open his mouth about much else, right? He's very
The unsuccessful effort to repeal Obamacare was perhaps the biggest failure of Trump's presidency. When the consequences and trade-offs became apparent, the unpopular repeal effort made the Affordable Care Act more popular, and that's where it stands today. So, there's an argument to be made, and people are making it. Jon Storr has made it, that, the polls appear to be tied at the moment, but that's because polls this far out are flawed, especially with people who really don't want either one to run and nobody's paying attention, et cetera, et cetera. What they're hiding is how weak Trump actually is. He can't debate the way he did in 2016. He can't give rallies the way he did in 2016. If you compare him side to side, you can see where his speech and his manner have deteriorated since 2016.
That was a big hobby in 2016, showing what it used to be in 2010, and
it was even worse.
Yeah.
And his positions that he has staked out are not popular. And he's really, in the end, going to turn out to be a weaker candidate than people anticipate at this point. They fear him, but they really have to objectively analyze him.
Well, perhaps someone will do that at some point. But right now it's difficult to rationally analyze him anyhow.
Can't do it just yet.
We're stuck with he smells bad for now, I think. That's in the news, or it's I should say it's trending on social media. It's a different.
It is trending on social media, and it's apparently been true for some time now.
I've never really been close enough to smell them, and I'm glad, but I don't know. It's what can I tell you? People say these things in retail. Maybe that's why he's not doing the retail politics thing after all. I really don't know, but it's allegedly the case. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that news, but it's out there.
Right.
Be irresponsible not to tell you.
Our friend Sarah Longwell, who runs a lot of focus groups for the Bulwark, has weighed in on the Nikki Haley frontier.
Okay.
And she said, setting the moral implications of Haley's answer about slavery aside, which, by the way, big yikes.
Yeah. Setting that aside.
Even as a political matter, it doesn't make any sense. The people who don't want to acknowledge slavery already have their candidate. It's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Nikki needs everybody else. What is she doing?
That is a good question. But yeah, you probably offered one of the better answers. She's running for vice presidency, his vice president, which, I mean, the more I think about, every time we say that, I think, do they know what he did with his last one? Because one, the guy who was vice president last time thought about running and then saw that he wasn't going to become president. And, then the prospect becomes, well, now you run for vice president. He's like, actually, thank you. No, I've been, and I don't want to do it again. And it's because he had tried to have me murdered. Do you all know that? I feel like he should write them all notes. We were once rivals, but I think you should know that you're slated for murder. You understand this, yes?
Right. As Rick Wilson also weighed in this morning, I'm sure all the major donors who flooded Nikki Haley with cash in the past few weeks are super happy they're backing somebody who pretends slavery wasn't the cause of the Civil War. Bravo.
Yeah, good job. But of course, if they think, everything for them is economic, so maybe they actually believe that. I don't know. We could find out that you can't be shocked that some of her donors are secret racists as well. But yeah, I mean, for all the people who backed her saying, well, look, I understand Donald Trump is the populist choice, but I'm going with the intellectuals, the smarts. I still believe in that for president. Oh boy. Oh dear. Well, didn't work out. It was never going to be Ron DeSantis in that role. That's for sure.
Right.
Is Tim Scott out? Did he drop out? Is he still running?
He's disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, that I know. But I was sort of wondering,
Vivek Ramaswamy is pulling all his TV ads, says they're ineffective.
Well, he's right.
Ron DeSantis sat in a big boy chair that made him look tiny and gave an interview, and people are laughing at him. That's also in the news. And that's about all you can say about and Chris Christie may still exist, but who cares? So that's basically, Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. Just get used to it.
I guess so. Is there any?
And that's my presentation for today. I don't really have anything else, but I just thought those things were interesting, and I'm happy to explain legal terms as somebody who doesn't know anything about legal terms. But I don't play a lawyer on the internet. I don't play an expert. I'm just telling you what I read.
Yeah, well, it's good. It gives us a chance to go over it and see what primers are out there, and occasionally I can clear some things up. Like okay,
almost always.
Yeah, if you. Oh, thanks.
You know this stuff. I don't know this stuff, but that's why it's so interesting.
Talked about it in a classroom.
I don't find stuff that I already know interesting. I like to learn new stuff.
Yeah, that's the boring part. What's the point of learning all this stuff if you don't want to talk about it a second time? I don't know, but it's interesting to me.
Bringing it up. You get to,
that's
talk
right.
about it a second time.
Every once in a while, right? Yeah, it's 30 years later. Oh yeah, I was there that day. They talked about that. I remember they covered that. That's it. But
and while you're at it, what's this thing about the mace on the wall? I still don't get that.
Yeah, well, these are small details, and I guess it was worth jumping on the opportunity to explain that, because they do. It's a good explainer about the motions in limine, and then. But what people probably really needed was, well, what was that other one that we had just the other day, and how come there's two terms for stuff that happens before the trial? Well, it depends who you're arguing in front of. You make a motion in limine. If you win it and the other side thinks you shouldn't, they'll make a interlocutory appeal of that ruling, bringing it to the next court.
The way I look at it is that there's stuff that we're discussing as to whether or not you're allowed to talk about it, and stuff that you must talk about, and you have to talk about it now. They're not the same thing.
Slavery, like, for instance. Yeah, no, that's it's different things. I don't know why it was all done in. I mean, I know why it was all done in Latin. I don't know why we still do it in Latin.
I don't know. Do you have a white powdered wig when you do it?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they only barely got rid of that.
Where's Rumpole or the Bailey when you need him?
Sticking to the other side of the pond, staying away from this. And a good idea at that. All right. Well, lots more to round up. I wonder if I'm trying to think if there was anything else splashy and weird that required a moment of your time. Oh,
no, don't forget, this is a quiet week. This is like holiday week between Christmas and New Year's, where stuff doesn't usually go on.
Right.
There's a lot going on for a quiet.
A lot of interlocutory nonsense that should have waited until afterwards. I did remember sort of what the point I want. Remember yesterday I was like, what was that thing I wanted to tell you again? But it was our discussion of the two gun stories that you brought up. Both the one from, and where were they again? And I don't remember.
One was in
from Tennessee,
the New York Times about the Coventry folks in Tennessee, and the other was in the Washington Post about the Newtown families talking to Heidi Heitkamp and other Democratic senators.
Right. Okay. Now I recall. And the thing I was thinking of, I guess, I don't remember what prompted the thought the first time, but then when I was taking a second look at those articles, and I was thinking about but something else prompted it also afterwards. Thinking about, though, I think we were talking about a new generation of leadership coming up into elected office and everything, but it made me think of that maybe the big change, if there ever is one finally, over gun policy and how people will approach it and not make the mistakes of the Heidi Heitkamps and the Tennessee state legislators, that pretty soon, and I'm sure it's happened somewhere by now on the state legislative level, but pretty soon we'll be having members of Congress, and then eventually we'll have the first president of the United States. Not that they weigh in that much on legislative policy so much, but we're going to start seeing elected legislators who grew up with regular active shooter drills while they were in school. We don't have that yet. We just have people who are parents of kids who tell them about it, but the kids regard it as pretty routine. I don't know how often they talk to their parents about things when they get home about stuff like those drills, but it's going to be real interesting when the elected officials are the people who realize, I actually, grew up every day with a reminder of the danger that guns are posing to kids in school, not secondhand, but firsthand. Or we all already have members of Congress who were in school when there was an incident in their schools, except it's murdery Trader Green, so it's of no help. But is
this an okay boomer discussion? You're saying that the older generation has to retire. Let some young blood in here who understands what this issue is.
This will be happening anyway, so you don't necessarily have to hasten it in any way. But I'm wondering whether that will make a difference or not, or whether you can do things like take the Civil War battle flag down in South Carolina, and 10 years later be like, "What slavery? What are you talking about?"
Speaking of Nikki Haley, she had a response this morning. She said, "Of course, the Civil War was about slavery. We know that. That's the easy part. Yeah. What I was saying is, what does it mean to us today? And that's what it means: freedom. That's what that was all about." That statement makes no sense. Anthony Michael Crease, the constitutional scholar from Georgia, says, if Nikki Haley wants to talk about what the meaning of the Civil War is for us today, she should have plenty of detailed thoughts about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
She might.
And I, for one, would like to hear them.
Well, that was I was not going to recover from this anytime soon. Although, I guess she had the germ of an answer. She really could have said, well, look, everybody knows that the Civil War was about slavery. I thought that he was asking a more nuanced question, but it turns out that he really just wanted me to say the cause of the war was slavery, and so the cause of the war was slavery. But I thought he was looking for something, like that'll get you one. It's a correct multiple choice exam answer. I thought he was asking the college
had a good
level
answer on Twitter.
Oh?
Richard M. Nixon, the late Richard M. Nixon, tweeting. The Civil War was fought over slavery. We all know that. A stain in our nation and no excuse. And some don't want to hear this, folks. It raises an underlying question. What's a state's relationship to the federal government?
Well, sort of.
That was a better answer than hers.
Yeah. I mean, that would be okay as yeah. And I guess here there's more explanation. Like on a college level exam, you can get to that exploration, and the professor wants you to make that exploration, but you do first have to say slavery and then, expound on the various nuances. And then when you're reminded, well, I'm just surprised that you didn't say slavery. I mean, instead of, well, what do you want me to say about slavery? I want you to say it's bad.
It's about freedom. Well, freedom for who to do what?
Yeah, I mean, holy cow.
To Nikki Haley on Twitter.
To say the least.
Not a very good answer even today.
No. And I'm surprised, or whatever, not really. But
Democrats assail Haley for omitting slavery as Civil War cause, says Bloomberg this morning. So it's getting to be a national story.
Well, I mean, that was awfully dumb. And she certainly could have clarified by coming back and saying it better, but she didn't. And that's amazing. And that's the point of the story.
Anyway, that is the story. So,
see, I told you.
Wednesday? Are you here
on
Monday?
That's a good
What's
question.
The story there?
I don't know. I'm going to be so drunk. I don't know. We certainly could, but no. We'll probably take the day off and enjoy it and watch a parade. What do you say?
Sounds like a good idea. Take care.
Okay, very good. All right, welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have this note. Justice tells me, I guess the Nikki Haley camp is now out there claiming that the questioner at yesterday's, whatever it was, town hall, who knows what, was a Dem plant put there to trap her, which I can understand why they would think so, but I mean, what a dumb trap. I mean, they lay out a little leg snare, and she steps in it and then says, well, that's the end for me, and grabs a shotgun and blows her own head off. It's just not that tough a trap. I guess I could see where, and when I was listening to the question being posed, I was thinking, well, I don't know New Hampshire Yankees all that well or anything, but, I guess if you could be an old school New Hampshire Yankee Republican who, grew up in a household where they said, yeah, we're proud of New England Yankee Republicans winning the Civil War. That's a point of pride, and don't forget it. My heritage, they say down in the South. We lost the Civil War, but heritage, something. Well, imagine it's that much stronger when you win the Civil War. But I also did think, well, it's also entirely possible that this is a person who will never, even if they're not a Democrat, would just never vote for any one of these Republicans, but is a Republican. We do have those sorts of Republicans in this country as well. And, maybe this wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool current Republican activist who was asking this question. But as far as traps go, like, I have an idea. I see people rubbing their hands together. This is me rubbing my hands together, by the way, and then and saying, what I'll do is I'll give them such a softball that there's no way they could possibly whiff it. But if they do, think about how, what a bombshell that would be. What was the cause of the Civil War? What color was George Washington's white horse? Well, nuance, yada. The answer is slavery. Boom, out of the park. Well, I'll risk it all on a pitch that she might well smash out of the park. And, we're going to sneak you in, and you're going to lay a trap, and that's the trap. What was the cause of the Civil War? You might spring that trap on yourself. It just might be worthless. You might have wasted your whole night. The likelihood of it being a trap I don't know. On the other hand, I could see saying, I bet she will answer this question wrong. And I don't know whether the gamble here is she's from South Carolina, so she's going to have to give a Southern answer, or what? I don't know what else it could be, quite honestly, but you know, it certainly could be. I guess it would be there could be a sense in which it's a very astute trap. There's no way that she can acknowledge the real cause of the Civil War and not lose support among Republicans. So I'm going to ask her that, whether it's in New Hampshire or not. I mean, you could ask the same question in South Carolina and get the same answer, but I don't know. The likelihood that it was a genuine search for her opinions on the Civil War, it probably wasn't that either. I don't know. But it's not going to help you any. I mean, so basically your story is that the other party sent someone to lay out the dumbest, most obvious trap ever, and you just stomped on that rake because what? There's no real reason for it. So I don't know if that really helps to say it was a trap, but there's no way out now except for, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever seen politicians say this thing, but I feel like I've seen other people say it, not people running for office particularly not against a person whose, whole plan for running for office and serving in office is to say, never admit that you were wrong about anything. But you could just say, under the lights, the harsh glare of the spotlight, I, was dancing around looking for, my mind was going in 1,000 different directions. Cause, in reality, there are a number of other factors that played into, how did we get from this disagreement, this intense disagreement over something as basic as human chattel slavery, but how do we get from that to war? Invites different questions, different levels of nuance, perhaps. But, all right, you could certainly go back and say, yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about like the sophisticated answer about the various different things that played into the situation. But no, just as you learned in school as a kid, good old fashioned traditional American values where everybody can get behind, right? The Civil War was about slavery. I just should have said that. I really didn't think that he was looking for that, because it's kind of a basic thing, like coming and asking me what color was George Washington's white horse. White. Okay, why are you asking me the question, though? She could have gone with the I'm too smart for my own good kind of excuse. But, yeah, sure, the basic answer is slavery. But she's opted not to, and that's interesting all by itself, I guess. All right, let's see. Other things that I wanted to bring to your attention that I have put away both in pocket and otherwise. Oh, you know what? Since I mentioned it early on, and I think I did, although I might have mentioned it in the break to Greg, the discussion of Michigan and the discussion of the trouble that Robin Vos now faces with Trump Republican base and their way of thinking about him. There's more news from Michigan, and you probably know about this. And Rosalind McGregor, as always, is our source of that news. And she has given me 2 pieces, and there are 2 days left in this week. So why not share some of these? But specifically, first, we'll start with the story of the Michigan Republican Party and the disarray they now find themselves in. It doesn't involve, the story doesn't directly involve, I don't think, Robin Vos, but rather Christina Caramo, who fell into, whatever, I don't know, the role of leader of the state party in Michigan. And there's a lot, we could make the rest of the show about Michigan. It's really true. We could. Why don't we roll Rosalind's piece here to set the stage, and then we'll go and round up the rest of Michigan news, and then we'll have even more for tomorrow, but that's unrelated. But this, I think, can be a news cluster. Let's roll her piece from just the other day on the mutiny within the Republican Party in Michigan.
Good morning, David.
Good morning,
Today
indeed.
I have for you a delightful segment about Republicans in disarray in Michigan.
Yes.
Regular listeners may remember that back in February, there was a big mess at the Republican State Convention where the GOP managed to select a chairperson only after the event site threatened to throw them out because they were very much over their contracted rental time for the building. That person was Christina Caramo. Now, the GOP local party chairs are calling for a mutiny, according to the folks at Fox 2 Detroit. From Jack Nissen come the details. About 10 months after electing her chair of the Republican Party, some members of the GOP are calling for Christina Caramo to step down from the position. Among the names calling for her removal is Oakland County Republican Party Chair Vance Patrick, who said Caramo wasn't, quote, capable, unquote, of running the party or fostering the growth needed to win statewide and local elections in Michigan. Ahead of a pivotal 2024 election, when Michigan could play a factor in the larger political landscape, the reported infighting between Caramo and some party officials could derail plans to retake an open U.S. Senate seat. Also at stake is a chance to reclaim the state legislature after the 40-year historic Democratic takeover. A statement from the Oakland County GOP said, quote, "Because of this, I am urging the Michigan GOP State Committee to vote to remove Christina Caramo from her position as the chair of the Michigan Republican Party," unquote. The letter said leadership, quote, "must align," unquote, with the party's objectives and blame Caramo for creating, quote, divergence between them.
Whoops. Okay. Let's see if I can get the mute button working again. I just wanted to pause it at this point to draw a parallel here. I don't often do this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rosalind. But you see, by the way, that what might have motivated some of this is a calling for a mutiny. I mean, they're using different terms here, but let's remove Caramo from the chair. A motion to vacate the chair. Tell me this isn't motivated by what went on in the House of Representatives and the removal of Kevin McCarthy from his position of leadership. This happens much more frequently with state party chairs than it does with speakers of the House, but I just wanted to interrupt and point that one out. Now, I'm sorry, Rosalind. Back to you. Didn't mean to interrupt.
According to the letter, the state party was invisible during the recent election cycle, leaving candidates to campaign on their own. Quote, "Our state party has been left in shambles with regard to fundraising and effective staff work. There is a new controversy every week, distracting from the important business of organizing the party to win elections," read the letter. The letter ended with a call to remove Caramo as chair as the first move towards helping rebuild the party. Caramo was elected chair during the party's nominating contest in Lansing in February, beating out more than a dozen other candidates, including former candidate for state attorney general Matt DePerno. She's also stirred controversy by drawing parallels between gun safety legislation and the Holocaust. Listeners may remember past segments talking about Michigan GOP members getting into fistfights and breaking teeth and ribs at meetings this past spring. That's in addition to news that the GOP had to borrow serious cash to pay for guest speakers at the regular fall convention held on Mackinac Island. The event is usually a moneymaker for the GOP, but failed to break even this year. Other GOP leaders have complained publicly about a lack of fundraising, poor decision-making on expenses, and not being transparent with how funds are being used. This includes not using the GOP's headquarters and office building in Lansing because the utility bills are too high. Instead, Caramo has been meeting at the Macomb County GOP offices. Also, earlier this year, she didn't make any friends by removing from important positions folks with financial expertise. It's always nice to have some good schadenfreude at this time of year. Raise a glass to the Michigan GOP in disarray. Back to you, David.
Yes, thank you. And again, sorry to interrupt. I just suddenly seized by that thought and then, of course, ruined it by fumbling with the mute button enough. So making a lot of noise. But, yeah, I thought, well, great point. That is some serious disarray on multiple levels. And I guess I'll follow that up with a different Michigan story. Although, again, I want to acknowledge something, and maybe we'll share tomorrow this story in the Washington Post, running under the headline of "Can the Exhausted, Angry People of Ottawa County learn to live together. In other words, the Washington Post has discovered the ongoing saga, the days of our lives, if you will, in Ottawa County that Rosalind's been telling us about all this time. Like, we are actually way ahead of the curve in the national news discovery of what's going on in Ottawa County. And of course, there's a hook. There's a current news development that she also has taped ahead of time for us, and we can probably share tomorrow. But in the meantime, here I'll double back to another of the national papers of record, the New York Times. It's the other one. There are West Coast papers of record, but they come out later. So, we don't borrow as much from the Los Angeles Times as we could, for instance. But at any rate, the other East Coast centric paper of record, the Washington Times, that everybody on the East Coast hates now for some reason, but they still, in fact, do some good work. This another view of what's going on in Michigan on a different front, but it also, I guess, contributes to the I don't know what, the intensity, the order of magnitude of disarray that the Republican Party is in there in Michigan. I guess you can take a quick glance over your shoulder backwards and see what you lost, even though, it's not like the Michigan Republican Party was any great shakes necessarily, but they've done better in the past. Not that it made any difference in this situation, and for weird reasons. Okay, so here's the story. The New York Times reports the headline, "A fake Trump elector," you know about them, in Michigan, told prosecutors of regret and anger. And now that I'm thinking of the fake electors thing again, I guess thinking back once again to the astonishing news out of the Nikki Haley camp in the last day or so. I know I had this thought on social media before the show began. I guess, this is what happens when a party thinks that, fake electors, just forging electoral college certificates is no big deal, I guess. You're going to end up thinking that, I can pull the wool over people's eyes about the cause of the Civil War. I don't know. Anyway, I guess that's why they thought that this insurrection was no big deal. The first one, the original one, the one that the 14th Amendment, they now argue, was supposed to apply to, even as it doesn't have any prospective application to insurrections following the Civil War. No, it's easier to reach that conclusion, I guess, if you also don't think that there was anything about the actual Civil War that any of this insurrection material should have applied to. Because it wasn't about anything in particular. It was just about how folks wanted to live. Some folks wanted to live by owning other folks. And, what can you do? It's just an economic decision. It's about how government is going to run, is I think what she landed on yesterday. Anyway, back to Michigan. Just a diversion because it's about fake Trump electors. But one of them has flipped. The Trump supporter is the only one of the 16 fake Michigan electors who has agreed to cooperate with the authorities and had charges against him dropped. That's what the subheader tells us this is about. Danny Hakim writing this for, again, the New York Times. And the story goes like this. One of the Republicans in Michigan, who acted as a fake elector for Donald J. Trump, expressed deep regret about his participation, according to a recording, that's right, poesy, of his interview with the state attorney general's office that was obtained by the New York Times. This elector, James Renner, is thus far the only Trump elector who has reached an agreement with the office of Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, which brought criminal charges in July against all 16 of the state's fake Trump electors. Good. In October, Ms. Nessel's office dropped all charges against Mr. Renner after he agreed to cooperate. So what's the deal with this guy? Mr. Renner, 77, was a late substitution to the roster of electors in December of 2020 after two others dropped out. I wonder about some of these people who dropped out and were substituted for. This happened in one or two other states as well, and I wonder whether they saw the writing on the wall and thought they're trying to, one, look, Trump lost this state. I'm off the hook. I don't have to go to the state capitol that day. It would have been a great honor, et cetera, but I'm out. And then you get the call, no, you should actually come here. And I have a feeling that a couple of these people thought, no, not something I really should be involved in. No, thank you. I'll beg off for this. And if they need somebody else, they can go to the alternates list. They always do have an alternate list. And I guess Renner was on it, or at least got put on it at the last second. So he was a late substitution to the roster of electors in December of 2020 after two others dropped out. He told the Attorney General's office that he later realized, after reviewing testimony from the House investigation of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that he and other electors had acted improperly. He actually, watched the proceedings and read the report and said, oh my God, all the things they told us were lies. What was I doing? I can't overemphasize how once I read the information in the J6 transcripts, how upset I was that the legitimate process had not been followed, he said in an interview. I felt that I had been walked into a situation that I shouldn't have ever been involved in. It's a little convoluted, but I get the point. Mr. Renner's lawyer, Matthew G. Borgula, I guess, Borgula, had no comment. All right. Charges have now been brought against fake electors in 3 states, Georgia, we know about that one, Michigan, and Nevada. And investigations are underway in other states, including Arizona and New Mexico. In Georgia, prosecutors in Fulton County, which includes Atlanta, have looked far beyond the electors themselves and charged Mr. Trump, the former president, and many of his key allies over their efforts to keep him in power despite his loss in 2020. Trump also faces charges over election interference from Jack Smith, the special counsel appointed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. In Michigan, Ms. Nessel, a Democrat, has only charged the electors, but has said her investigation is still open. And by the way, just in terms of covering all the bases here, once again, it may be that she ends up charging Trump, maybe yes, maybe no, but we have 3 different nets being cast here, right? In D.C., Jack Smith charges pretty much just Donald Trump and I guess a couple of his closest advisors. But Trump is the main focus of that prosecution. Down in Fulton County, it's Trump and everybody connected to the fake electors in Georgia and the Coffee County break-in and everybody they could get, the widest possible net. In Michigan, they said, well, we'll just charge the local actors and not Trump. So every possible angle of, well, maybe there's some more, I don't know. But the most obvious difference is here. If you separate people into 2 baskets, Trump and the upper echelon, if not just Trump himself, then everybody connected. And then a third approach would be, well, what if you did instead of Trump and not everybody, and then everybody including Trump, and then I guess the third option would be everybody minus Trump. And fascinating. We'll see how all of this plays out. I don't know whether that was a conscious decision to do things that way or whether it was just, I don't know if we can establish jurisdiction over Trump all that easily in all of this if he doesn't commit an overt act here in Michigan. But now, as it turns out, he might be on the hook for some of that as well. Okay, so where were we? There was, in Michigan, Nessel has charged only the electors, but said her investigation is still open. So maybe they charged Trump, maybe not. During their interview of Mr. Renner, her investigators asked about a number of other people involved, including Sean Flynn, a lawyer who worked with the Trump campaign on the ground in Michigan, and Rudy Giuliani, Trump's former personal lawyer. And this is where the story gets interesting, but only outside of the telling of it here. I'll tell you what that means afterwards. Mr. Giuliani, it adds parenthetically, is among those charged in Georgia. Both he and Mr. Trump have pleaded not guilty. It's not clear if they or Trump himself have legal exposure in Michigan. The Detroit News recently reported that Trump was taped, we mentioned this, in December 2020, pressuring 2 members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers not to certify the election results, providing direct evidence of his role in trying to overturn the Michigan vote. So maybe jurisdiction over Trump through that call. Mr. Renner is a former state trooper and retired businessman. both, who volunteered as a local party activist in Clinton County, which is near Lansing, the state capital. He has never served as an elector before and typically supported Republican campaigns by passing out signs and distributing flyers. He said he was contacted by the head of the county Republican Party a day or so before the electors had planned to meet on December 14th, 2020, and was asked to fill in for someone who was dropping out and agreed to do so. And I don't know whether he bothered to ask why are they dropping out. He was clearly, he says, unaware of the impropriety of it all. So, for all he knew, the guy had COVID and didn't want to go to Lansing, although among Republicans, that would be a reason to go and say, I'm demonstrating for you that I don't believe in COVID. But anyway, could have been anything. Family obligation. Didn't feel like it. Car broke down. Whatever it might be. Since Michigan had already been certified for Joe Biden, who won the state by more than 150,000 votes, the Trump electors were barred from convening in the state Capitol building, which was largely closed at the time because of the pandemic. They ended up meeting in the basement of the state Republican headquarters, which even Christine Caramo won't use anymore because the utility bills are too high, right? We just learned that. During a pre-trial hearing earlier this month for several of the electors, Laura Cox, the former chairwoman of the state Republican Party before Caramo, testified that she and other local party officials had drafted language for the electors to sign that made clear that they were only acting on a contingency basis, like Pennsylvania, in the event that the Trump campaign's election litigation succeeded. So what happened, right? They actually had that language prepared. They had the foresight, as the Pennsylvania Republicans did, to get themselves out of trouble ahead of time. What happens? Well, Ms. Cox, now, of course, replaced by Christina Caramo, and they're probably wishing they had somebody with that kind of foresight back at the head of their party. But Ms. Cox was sidelined by COVID on the day of the meeting. Isn't that awful? Yeah. Of all the things, too. Which others have observed, by the way. She was sidelined with COVID, but had been, vocal and demonstrative in going about and campaigning unmasked throughout the entire thing, because masks don't work and COVID isn't a real thing. And then it hits her, but it hits her at a critical moment. So critical that on the day of the meeting of the electors, she's too sick to show up. And she said that the Trump campaign then, in her absence, went against her instructions by not including what we now know to be exculpatory language, right? The excuse that they gave in Pennsylvania that has kept them from being charged to date. It was all right there on a silver platter, but they didn't take it, and they didn't take it because this woman, what's her name? Laura Cox, wasn't there to fight for it. They might have rejected her, her motion to include this, whatever procedure she was looking to use to get this language included. They might have overruled her, but she wasn't there to fight for inclusion of this language to keep Michigan Republicans from getting themselves in trouble because COVID. Now, before I actually finish the article, now I'm going to jump out and go over to a social media post that I put aside along with this one, which is how I discovered this story. Joshua Holland, who you all likely know from social media as well, commenting this way, fascinating nugget in this one, pointing out this particular part of the story. Michigan Gops chair Laura Cox drafted text saying that the fake electors would only represent Trump if a court found he'd won. But Cox, who'd been on the campaign trail maskless, that's where I saw that observation made, says she got COVID. She doesn't say it in the story, but through other internet sleuthing and digging that Josh Holland did, she says she got COVID from Rudy Giuliani. When he showed up in Michigan to try to rig this whole thing up, he gave her COVID, and then she's too sick to show up to save Michigan Republicans from themselves, and they pushed ahead with it, and now they all face charges. That's rather amazing. And then again, Josh just saying the info about her getting COVID from Rudy isn't actually in the article. Don't look for it there. Or about campaigning maskless. It came from previous research and Googling elsewhere, according to Josh Holland. So, okay. I just thought that was a interesting and amazing part, and serendipity of it all. It's almost as if God intervened and thought you should all face criminal charges and just struck down Cox's efforts to protect you from yourselves. Rather amazing, but I guess God wills it. What can you do? Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this New York Times article, having now explored this thing and explained why, although the text of the article, the originalists, the textualists would say that this article doesn't support, actually most readers would say this article doesn't support this conclusion that Laura Cox got COVID from Rudy. I'm at the moment taking Josh Holland's word for it on that, and he's usually pretty good about that. And he says he found it from Googling. We can find it too. Did I find it ahead of time? No, I didn't. So maybe that's something we want to Google and check out, either with the rest of the time that we have available to us today or off the air, or maybe you want to do it now and see what kind of results you can get. But regardless, I think that this article at least establishes that, well, through some strange combination of circumstances, which we all kind of understand for Michigan Republicans probably did involve COVID defiance, she ends up sidelined with COVID at the critical moment, and now 15 of the 16 fake electors in Michigan find themselves facing state charges, and the 16th doesn't face those charges, but only because he's flipped as against the other 15. So, at the same, where we left off by pointing this out and then saying Cox was sidelined by COVID on the day of the meeting and said that the Trump campaign went against her instructions by not including such language. And at the same pretrial hearing during which Laura Cox told the story of her wanting to have that information included but being sidelined by COVID. At that same hearing, Terry Lynn Land, a former Michigan Secretary of State, who was originally designated as a 2020 Republican elector, said she declined to meet on December 14th, 2020. She's one of the two that dropped out for some strange reason, but I guess she explains herself. Why? Because Mr. Trump had not been certified by state officials. Tony Zammit, Z-A-M-M-I-T, which I imagine rhymes with Willamette and damn it as well, a former spokesman for the state party who attended part of the meeting, testified that in his view, the vast majority of the electors were not culpable, but, quote, going along with what the lawyers were telling them, unquote. Okay, important. Mr. Renner said in his interview with investigators that when he showed up, quote, I knew nothing about the electoral process. That's easy to understand, easy to believe. You might think, well, how do you rise to the level to be selected as an elector without having any knowledge of what the Electoral College is about? And the answer is, well, one, he was an alternate. Don't forget that. Last minute at that. And two, very frequently, look, all it is it's a reward to state party activists. And sometimes it's parceled out and, this county or that county, if the chair of that county recommends somebody who's just been a loyal Republican for a long time and they would love to participate in something cool, even if it's a coup, go ahead and do that. And so they pull this guy in and it might very well be the case that they don't know of a great deal about what goes on. And sometimes people know something about the process, but they mostly get instructed. They're just there to participate in something that they think is interesting and unique. They don't have Electoral College experts around the country who they pull in for this stuff. They're not professional electors. So I knew nothing about the electoral process, says Renner. 3 of the electors took the lead at the signing session, he said. Michon Maddock, former co-chair of the state Republican Party. I think we've heard that name in Rosalind's reporting before. Kathleen Burden, a Republican National Committee woman, and Maria Rodriguez, the only lawyer among the electors. They have, by the way, all 3 of these people pleaded not guilty. In the interview, Mr. Renner said that, quote, I was accepting the individuals that were in authority, unquote, knew, quote, I don't know what word he used that they just converted to new, but the thinking here is most of this is quotes, except for the word new. That's just odd. I was accepting the individuals that were in authority knew what they were talking about. I don't know. I can't imagine how it was that he actually expressed himself in that, but there might have been some hemming and hawing and they just took that out. But he said that he later began studying the House transcripts and official procedure for the electors after he and the other fake Trump electors were sued in civil court this January. And he was alarmed by what he found, he said. It was only then that I realized that, hold it, there is an official state-authorized process for this, he said. Before that, he said, I had never been an elector. I had never discussed it with anybody. I was used to a much more informal process at the county level. And so that's when I became suspicious of what had gone on, not what was going on then. He didn't realize at the time what was going on, but afterwards. He said he later realized that what happened was not legitimate. In Georgia, more than half of the fake Trump electors agreed to cooperate with prosecutors before charges were brought in the case there. In Michigan, all 8 charges against Mr. Renner, including forgery and conspiracy counts, were dropped as part of his agreement with Ms. Nessel's office. Her ongoing investigation means that the legal aftermath of the last presidential election in Michigan will not be over before voting begins on the next one. Pretrial hearings in the electors' case are scheduled to last into February. The state's presidential primary takes place on February 27th. I am upset. I don't show it, but I am, Mr. Renner told investigators, adding that to say he felt betrayed is an understatement. That's all I can say. And that's the last thing that he does say. So I don't know. Well, at any rate, that's pretty interesting all by itself, and interesting news from out of Michigan, and fits in with the Michigan Republicans in disarray story that Rosalind shared with us earlier. Okay, I think that's interesting. We'll do more updates on news from Michigan tomorrow, if I can remember and get back around to it. In the meantime, let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you. All right, I think both of these things are about Lauren Boebert, which we don't really have to dive into at this point. We got the gist of it. There's a couple of other interesting things to add here, and maybe what we'll do is add still more from the fallout from the 14th Amendment cases. I mentioned to you that there was... Oh, and I left off in the middle of Chris Geidner's thing, too. Although I'm a little bit worried that if we just resume the reading of Chris Geidner's piece, we may run out of time again. but I did kind of want to get through that. Let's see. I mean, did I hope I left it readily available here, but I also wanted to bring you in. There's his piece. Some short and sweet thing. And maybe what I'll do is I'll start with the short and sweet and get that out there. But a interesting observation made by Vikram David Amar, which I circulated to the best of my ability on social media the other day. I think he definitely hits on a point that does show up in the Colorado Supreme Court ruling and may also have been addressed in the Bald and Paulson article. But I've not seen anybody narrow it down and focus on this one aspect of things until, not quite in this way, and to add just a little bit more depth that helps make it a little bit more understandable. Here's the piece. Bad arguments against the application of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment against President Trump. Part 1 of a 2-part series. I don't know if that was the case when I first saw it. And does he link to the second part? We might have to go searching for it based on what I think the quality of the first part. So lots of people have argued about this, and is the president an officer, and is that really what the trial judge really believed, or was she just trying to set it up procedurally such that the Colorado Supreme Court would have to come out exactly where they did, declaring that yes, this was insurrection, and yes, the penalty for insurrection is disqualification for the ballot, and she, the trial judge, didn't want to be the one to make the call on disqualification directly, so she came up with this weird dodge, knowing that it would be completely rejected at the Colorado Supreme Court level, and she'll be reversed, and she looks like she doesn't know what she's talking about, kind of, sort of, but I think that she was kind of doing this with a wink and a nod. Well, anyway, they destroyed the idea that the president isn't an officer, but did it with more of a frontal assault. Of course he's an officer. It's the office of the presidency. It's referred to as an office, I think somebody else writes, 25 times I think that maybe came from the Colorado Supreme Court decision itself. 25 times in the body of the Constitution, the office of the presidency is referred to. And this other legal construction, tortured and convoluted. But Vikram David Amar, as I said, kind of finds one other argument about it besides its absurdity on its face, which is of some interest. Remember that the argument that the trial court judge uses here, one of the parts of the argument is that, the section in question lists the offices to which it is said to apply and doesn't include among them the president or the vice president, and further that there are arguments that the framers, the writers of the 14th Amendment, had a draft at some point which did allegedly specifically name the president and vice president, and then they decided not to go with that version. That's actually difficult to get past, but the argument that was offered as well, officers is listed here, and everybody understood the office of the presidency to be an officer of the United States. And come on, that was enough. And just, the economy of words was fine here. Let's make it broad enough to include president and maybe some other ones. And the closer calls will be some of the lower ranks, not the highest ranks. That won't be a close call. Let's leave that out. Well, that was still difficult to get past. And again, the judge argued, well, it's not only to list senators and representatives, but it did so in a certain order. You remember the actual wording of it goes, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath, yada, yada, right? All of that. You do the bad thing, you'll be disqualified. Who? Senators, representatives, electors, or any holder of any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state. And the judge says, well, that didn't name president or vice president, though they named electors for president and vice president, not the vice president and president themselves. And he's not an officer because reasons, and because his oath is different, which really, that's like a non sequitur. But again, she was trying anything. And somehow that's not an office under the United States, even though it's referred to that way for 25 times in the Constitution, according to the Supreme Court there. Very weird, very odd. And then, of course, the argument, well, you see, they do it in a sort of descending order. Senator, representative, elector, or any other office, civil or military. But quite honestly, looking at that, I mean, she said it, and I guess we all take it at face value, but is it absolutely clear that that's actually in descending order? I'm not positive that that's the case. Like, would you think that an officer of the United States, is the Secretary of State an officer of the United States? Probably. Most people would say yes. And they'd be subject to impeachment, for instance, right? That too is reserved for officers of the United States. So why not, right? But would anybody say, yeah, you know who outranks the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Treasury? Electors for vice president. I mean, they're the same people, but electors for the president and vice president. Really? You think so? I mean, given that you've confined last minute substitutes like Mr. Renner, who have no idea, have never done this before, and have nothing to do but say, yeah, sure, I'll show up that day and listen to the lawyers and sign the thing. I think most people would think, well, cabinet secretaries kind of outrank them. So it's not at all clear that this was given in specific descending order. And of course, there's only like 3 items on the list. Senator and representative, if you consider them to be, okay, members of Congress, right? 1 item, bucket number 1. Electors, bucket number 2, or everybody else, any other officer, civil or military, under the United States or any state. That's a big bucket, but there's really only 3 buckets here. Which one do they fit into? Well, how many items are there on the list? 3. Well, it's obviously in descending order. Is it really, or is that just random chance? We don't know for sure. No one said anything like that. And again, it's not clear to me that electors for president rank above cabinet secretaries, generals, right? Military generals. That's, there's only one order that the 3 items can be in order for it to be clearly descending order, and that's not it. So that was pretty weak, but it was meant to be weak. It was meant to be struck down. So, pretty dumb to start with. But that's not what Vikram is saying here. Let's get to it at long last. He writes, again, under the headline, Bad Arguments Against the Application of Section 3, there are many difficult legal and philosophical questions surrounding the litigation efforts to disqualify former President Donald Trump from presidential election ballots by virtue of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Good setup. Among them are, 1, what counts as insurrection or rebellion against the United States for purposes of Section 3? And what does it mean to have engaged in these activities? Good question, right? Not the one we're addressing. 2, what precisely is the role of the judiciary in this realm? And can state rather than federal courts make determinations that result in ballot exclusion of Mr. Trump? Well, of course they can. Sure, why not? But okay, not settled here. And 3, relatedly, what is the process that is required, or due, in the case of process, due process, what is the due process to make the factual findings that might underlie ballot exclusion? If and when the U.S. Supreme Court takes the case from Colorado, or a case from another state involving Section 3, it will have to confront these questions head on. At this point, without having studied these particular questions in more depth, I venture no opinion about what the right legal answers are. But in the past week, I have seen several essays criticizing the Section 3 efforts on grounds that are plainly not thoughtful or persuasive. In today's column and my next one, since he is already setting things up, I'll have to go looking for that one, I take up 2 prominent examples. Last Wednesday in Slate, Professor Larry Lessig. I've seen a lot of people citing this one, and I thought about reading it just for critiquing it, but now I'll just let Vikram do this because I think this does a pretty good job with one really important point. So last Wednesday in Slate, Professor Larry Lessig, in an essay entitled "The Supreme Court Must Unanimously Strike Down Trump's Ballot Removal," argued that the Colorado Supreme Court's ruling was erroneous because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not apply to Donald Trump. Meaning, I think he meant the broader case, that it doesn't apply to the presidency, buying into the logic, tortured as it was, necessary as it was, but tortured as it was, from the trial court in Colorado. It was not meant to be accepted, but Larry Lessig sees genuine wisdom in it. Lessig begins by his analysis by observing this. The puzzle in Section 3 is that it seems as if the framers of that text were just sloppy in their enumeration. The clause bars insurgents from being a senator or representative in Congress, or elector of president and vice president, or to hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state. We read it. The obvious question is why they would enumerate senator and representative, not to mention elector of president, but not the president. Okay, that's certainly the question. But when you begin, as Professor Lessig does, with a fatally flawed premise, in this case, the notion that specific mention of senators and representatives, but not the president, poses a puzzle, you are destined to go nowhere. Oh, why? Yeah, because, people do say that. Well, why would they say senator or representative and not president and vice president? They do mention the electors. Why not list them? Well, there's an answer specifically as to why list senator or representative. Is it to make a list in order? It turns out there's another reason. There is no puzzle here to solve. The presidency is an office under the United States, so it is mentioned specifically, just not by name. That is to say, office under the United States covers all of them. The presidency is there. It's just not mentioned by name. Why, though, would senators and representatives be identified with more particularity? Because, as everyone who has ever studied constitutional law should know, that senators and representatives do not hold office under the United States. What? What do you mean by that? Well, that term, office under the United States, is reserved for executive and judicial officers, not federal legislators. Yes, I'll just opine here. Yeah, we refer to them as being in office or having been elected to office. It's true, but they're not officers under the United States. And why do we say that? I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but there is textual reason to believe this. This is made clear by the so-called incompatibility clause of Article 1 of the Constitution, the article that focuses on Congress. I have sometimes seen this referred to as the ineligibility clause, as opposed to incompatibility, but they both describe the same function. And it says, no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house of Congress during his continuance in office. And this is meant to be prohibitive of a senator or representative simultaneously holding a seat in Congress and serving, for instance, in the cabinet. Right? We see this all the time when people are picked out of Congress to serve on a new president's cabinet. They vacate their seat in Congress, and there's either a special election to replace them if they are a member of the House, or an appointment made by the governor of their state, usually, if they are members of the Senate, and ultimately followed by a special election thereafter. But you get the point, right? People who move from Congress into the cabinet or any other thing, sub-cabinet, whether it's a secretary position or something beneath, or they get nominated as a judge, whatever it might be. but they vacate their seat in Congress. The point was you should only be occupying one branch at a time, unless, of course, you're Dick Cheney and you believe that the vice presidency occupies positions in two branches, or neither the legislative nor the executive, but some weird fourth branch. When you need to get out of trouble, you make up what you need to get out of trouble. That's what Dick Cheney did. Odd that his daughter sees things much more clearly. But at any rate, the point is that it says right here that no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office. Thus, you can't hold office under the United States and be in Congress at the same time. That's the incompatibility, the ineligibility of it. Thus, you can't hold office under the United States and be in the Congress at the same time, so that if Section 3 of the 14th Amendment had simply included persons holding office under the United States, that section then would not have covered members of Congress, which they definitely wanted covered, hence their inclusion by name. Why do we know that they definitely wanted members of Congress excluded from being permitted service under the United States if they were insurrectionists, if they had participated in rebellion? Because we saw what happened. We saw members be elected to Congress purportedly by former Confederate states show up and be denied entry, and were denied the ability to sit as members of Congress because they had been either in the Confederate Congress or the Confederate Army or what have you. So we've seen that applied. We saw that that was a problem for them, and they enumerated them for that reason. And also the fact that officers under the United States or any state wouldn't necessarily have been seen to cover senators and representatives because of the operation of the incompatibility clause. Hence their inclusion by name. Not because they were trying to make some sort of ordinal list or an exclusive list, which if the name of your office isn't on it, the section doesn't apply to you, but rather that the section should apply to everyone, including senators and representatives. The fact that a member of Congress is not an officer under the United States, he continues, also explains why he's not subject to the two-house process of impeachment and trial, but instead, as was just recently illustrated in the George Santos episode, can be removed only by a 2/3 vote of the House in which he sits. The impeachment provisions of the Constitution say that all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the puzzle here that Lessig says he sees is not the differential textual treatment of federal legislators and presidents in Section 3. Presidents are covered by category and thus need not be covered by particular title. The puzzle is why Professor Lessig seems to ignore this. His essay spends most of its digital ink arguing that it's inappropriate for a court to add the president to Section 3's coverage on the ground that it would be senseless or absurd for presidents not to be covered. He also spends time discussing whether the drafters of Section 3 expected presidents to be covered. But originalism has long eschewed reliance on expectations of drafters that are not reflected in the public meaning of the texts that are enacted. I need take no position here on the question of whether we would have to read the president as being covered, whether or not Section 3 already included him, but because the president is covered by Section 3's inclusion of officers under the United States, the absurdity argument Professor Lessig dwells on is beside the point. Now, there are those who challenge whether the president is an officer under the United States, although there are very few prominent academics from highly regarded institutions anyway who take that position. But Lessig doesn't appear to make, and certainly spends no time developing, that challenge. Indeed, he says explicitly, on the question of whether the president is properly described as occupying an office of the United States, the Colorado Supreme Court made a strong argument that the president is. Professor Lessig's essay never returns to this strong argument to debunk it, making all the time and effort he spends on whether a sensible Section 3 could have intentionally excluded the president, which is beside the point if the president does hold office under the United States. That's the real puzzle. Pretty good, actually. And I think that dispenses with things pretty quickly. So, that ain't good. Now, what is in part 2 of the series? I'm just wondering. We don't have time to read it today, but I thought I would quickly take a look. Another bad argument against the application of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to President Trump is, let's see, this is just the summary of it. But in his last column, he says, we know what he argues. In the space below, that is the second version or the second installment of all this, and I guess I better get our music started here, I address a non-legal objection to the application of Section 3, one probably on the minds of many critics and voiced quite early, in particular by the New York Times columnist Ross Douthat last week in his column titled The Anti-Democratic Quest to Save Democracy from Trump. The nub of the essay captured by the following passage. Let's see. Removal of candidate from the ballot, basically that it's anti-democratic. So we'll see whether Vikram does as good a job in dispensing with the anti-democratic argument that he did with this one. I thought fairly convincing that the incompatibility clause, the ineligibility clause, makes the case for why senators and representatives would be listed, but the president would not. If that really troubled you, I think that lays it to rest. Yes, it was mentioned in previous articles, but never quite singled out in this way. And I think it clarifies if you find yourself having that debate anywhere, one, extricate yourself immediately from that situation. But if you're stuck in it, now you'll be able to handle it pretty well, I think. Incompatibility clause. Speaking of incompatibility, or the opposite of it, Justice Putnam comes up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Not at all incompatible with what we've been doing here, although sometimes, in fact, overlapping with what we do here. What's he got on tap here today? First, a federal judge has ruled the removal of a Confederate memorial from Arlington National Cemetery can continue. Good thing, too, because it's gone.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this one here? A judge has ordered a woman who set fire to Wyoming's only full-service abortion clinic to pay nearly $300,000 in restitution, the full amount sought by prosecutors. Good luck getting it out of her, though. Hope she's got the money. And then, of course, the usual assortment, incompatible or not, of great stories from around the country and around the world. Stay tuned, and we'll see you tomorrow.